All right, it looks like it's time to start. So for those who are here today, thank you very much for joining us. My name is David Bowman. I'm the Executive Director for the Four Corners Regional Education Cooperative #1. And we're going to spend the next hour looking at what I would consider to be four essential techniques, four essential hacks for pulling information out of data. Over the course of, I don't know how many years, I've worked with very large data sets and very small data sets. And one question, well, two questions always seem to come up. One question is, what do you want to know? And sometimes that's the more difficult question. Figuring out what are the questions itself, figuring out what are the questions that we want to answer from the data. We have a ton of numbers. So what do we want to know? But once we have figured out that, then the next question is, well, how do you go about getting it? And it seems like over the many years, there are four techniques that I always keep returning to, just four very essential techniques for taking this massive numbers and answering the questions that we devised. So we're going to go through those four techniques today, one after the other. And we're going to use this data set as a sample. You'll see it's a fairly large data set. It has 100 lines of data in it. But the fact of the matter is, whether it's something has 10 lines of data or it has 10,000 lines of data, which I've also done, the techniques are exactly the same. So when we look at these four essential techniques, what you're going to find is that it doesn't matter how many lines of data you've got, because it's going to take the same amount of information to pull, the same amount of time to pull the information out of them, the same steps. So one of the things that always surprises me is when I see people printing off their worksheets or their grade books or their student test scores, print them off, grab a highlighter and say, okay, I want to find out, for example, how did my fifth grade students do? And they kind of go through and they just go line by line manually. Well, if it's something that can be put into Excel or Google Sheets for that matter, then there's never any reason at all to do things manually. With these four techniques, especially the first one, we can get Excel to do all the heavy lifting for us. So all we have to do is just say, here's what I want to know, and Excel will tell us the answer. So with that in mind, let us get into our four essential hacks for getting information out of data. So the very first technique, and this by far is the most essential technique for making Excel do the work for you. Whether you've got numbers as data, whether you've got words or what formulas, whatever you've got, the number one technique is something called named ranges. So if you look, so let's take a look at what we have here. So if you click on any cell, what you're going to see is up here in the upper left is the name of that cell, and it's by what column and by what row. So for example, I click here, that is cell E1 because it's column E, row 1. Okay, that's lovely. But we can give it its own name. So for example, instead of this being A1, we can simply call it student number, like that. So now what you'll see is when we click on that, it's no longer being described as A1. It has a name that we have given it. Now, where does this become important? When we've got a lot of information like this, and we want to go and find a specific point of data, if we have given that cell a name, we don't have to say, okay, where was it again? Oh, that's, start looking back and forth. Oh, that's row 11, R. Okay, there it is. Instead, we can just refer to it by its name. So we did one, so we called this student number. The name of this is now student number. As it turns out, not only can we give names to individual cells, we can give a name to a range of cells. So for example, instead of saying this is A2, A3, A4, A5, A6, and these are all of our student numbers, we can select the entire range from top to bottom and give that entire range its own name. So let's call this student number list. Now, where does this become useful? Well, as you can see, when we get to the next 3 hacks, those names are going to make it so much easier to pull information from the exact places where we can find the data. I'm going to show you another nifty little trick. So up here, we've got where we have the reference. So this is D6, for example. There's a little down arrow next to it. And when we click on that down arrow, it shows us all of the cells and all of the ranges that we've already given a name. So for example, instead of having to re-highlight all of those student numbers again, I can simply click on student number list, and it will automatically select that entire list. If I wanted, what used to be A1, I can just say, okay, don't show me A1, show me student number, and it will automatically go and select that particular cell or that range. So let's, when I'm looking at data and I'm starting to sort of set up to do my analysis, I've got my questions of things I want to know, but I'm presented with this whole mass of stuff here. One of the very first things that I'm going to do is start naming ranges. So I've already done some in this spreadsheet just for the sake of time. So for example, I've got one range that I already named called scale 2. So that's scale scores for the second test in this particular case. And I've got one for, I call time task 2. And so I click on that and it selects it. That's how much time the students took on the test for their second test. Now, one of the things that I do like to do, just to help me remember what all these names are, is I'm going to replace the column headings with the name of that particular range. That way, I don't have to go back and say, wait, what did I call that again, and try to figure it out. I can just look at my column headings, and there's my name. So, something you need to know. When you are creating a name for a range or a name for an individual cell, there are some things that you cannot use in the name. For example, the first character must be a letter or a number. Second thing to know is that there can't be any spaces. That's why you see when it says time task 2, they're all smushed together. There's no space in there. You can't use a hyphen, which I think is kind of weird. So if you do want to create something that looks like a space, what you're going to want to do is use an underscore. So instead of time task 2, or let's go to rush flag 1. So if I want it to look like rush flag 1, I might do rush underscore flag underscore 1. And you'll see there are no parentheses in there either. Your primary options are numbers, letters, and the underscore. So if I want it to look like rush flag space, then I need to put an underscore. But in most cases, I just mush them together. And it makes no difference. All right, so with that in mind, let's take a moment and do a little bit of setup here. So like I said, I've already named a bunch of these ranges. Thinking ahead to what questions I want to answer, I know that I'm going to be pulling information out of student grades. So let's go ahead and set that up as a named range. So I'm going to start with my first one. I'm going to highlight or select all the way down to my last one. And then to give it a name, all I have to do is go up here to the reference list and type it in. So I'm going to call this student grades. And I type it in and I enter. I have now given a name to that range. So later, if I want to get back, if I want to highlight that or feature it in some way, I can simply click on it there, and you'll see it is automatically selected. All right. So let's do a couple more real quick, but I'm going to rename this. So if I called this student grades, I'm going to type it up there. We're going to use overall gain. I know that I'm going to need that one. So let me select it. And yep, we got it all. And I will call this overall gain, which in this, for this data set, means from the pre-test to the post-test, how much did they improve? I know that I'm going to need time on task. So let me select that. This is for the first test, so I'm going to call it time task 1. And I know that I'm probably going to need percent. Oh, let me label it time task 1. And I know that I'm going to need scale score for the first test. So let me highlight it. I'll type in the name, scale 1. And let me put that up here, scale 1. And I know I'm going to need the student's percentile ranking. So let me highlight that. And we will call that percentile 1. Okay. So we're all set up and good to go. And you'll see that all of those named ranges are now in the list over here. Now, there's one more thing you can do to get back to them. And I'm spending a little extra time on this because it really is absolutely essential to everything else we're going to do. You know, when we write a formula, we could say, okay, look from A15 through A27. Okay, that's fine. And it'll select a certain range. But then if we go back and we sort of scratch our heads and say, wait, what am I looking at here? Well, we're looking at A15 to A27. Well, what's that? Then I've got to go figure out what it is. But I can use those names in my formulas. It makes the formulas super easy to write. And if I ever need to go back and troubleshoot them, all I have to say is, well, what am I looking at? And I'm looking at student grades, or I'm looking at gains, or I'm looking at time, or whatever it is. And the name of the range can be right in the formula. So I know exactly what the formula is doing and what it's doing it to. So we call this percentile 1. So now, if you ever need to pull up your whole list of named ranges and you want to see what they refer to, or you want to modify them in some way, like change what it's called, it's actually really simple to do in Excel. Let me go up here to formulas. So I've got file, home, insert page layout, formulas. And we got a bunch of, formulas, and we got a bunch of other stuff up here. But there's this neat little section called Name Manager. And I will click on that. And what you see is the list of all the cells and ranges that I have given a specific name. And it tells me what the values are inside of them. It tells me where they are and some other stuff. But if I ever need to, like, say, go back and change the name, I can simply select it, click edit, and then change the name right there. Okay, close, and we're good to go. We've made the change. So the first hack, the first most essential thing to do whenever starting to look at any kind of data is to name ranges. Because not only does it kind of keep it clear in your head what you're doing, it also makes it just crazy simple to start pulling information out of data. So, there's going to be a couple more sessions I'm going to be doing on Excel. We're going to do that the same thing for all of those sessions and all of the techniques that we're going to exhibit here. All right, so that's named ranges. Now let's see how we can start using those. So let's turn to hack number 2. Hack 1, named ranges. Name your ranges. Hack 2 is going to be probably the second most common thing that I'm doing when I'm looking at data. I'm counting. How many of this? How many of that? How many items meet a certain set of criteria? Like how many fifth graders? How many fifth graders that made gains? How many fifth graders that took more than the average number of minutes on the test? Just counting, right? Just give me the number of items. So let's take a look at two techniques. Count if and count ifs. So let me just, because it's kind of hard for me to pronounce those separately. So we've got count if and count ifs. And I see that my handwriting is even worse than my enunciation, but those are the two, and there's the difference right there. So this is going to look at one set of criteria. This will allow us to look at multiple sets of criteria, and we're going to use both of those. So whenever we set up a formula in Excel, the very first thing is always going to be the equal sign. And then we're going to have some kind of a command here. And then, so in this case, say count if. And then, so that's the action, count if. And then in our formulas, inside of parentheses here, we're going to be using some kind of parameters or some kind of criteria. So in this case, when we say count if, it's going to ask us, what are you counting and where is it? What do you want to find out? And so on. And all of that goes here. All right. So when we write the formulas, it's all you're going to see is going to be this. It's going to be, in this case, count. There we go. Count if, and then we're going to put in the parameters right here. So let's try that and see what happens. And the nice thing about Excel, I know a lot of people, when I started talking about formulas, well, write a formula for this, write a formula for that. Probably 2/3 of the people, their eyes just like sort of glaze over, then slowly start rolling back in their heads. Like, oh my gosh, now I've got to write formulas. The ones I'm going to show you are very simple, but very powerful. So let's take a look. So let's say we want to know, let's think about our question here. Let's say we want to know, just very simply, how many fifth grade students do we have? Now we've got 100 lines of data here, right? And these are our grades, so student grades, and it's 100 lines. The last thing that I want to do is just go through visually and go 1, 2, 3, 4. A, it's slow. B, it's prone to error. It's easy to make mistakes when you're trying to just manually count something. And honestly, I don't trust myself to do it accurately. I'll do it 3 times, and out of 3 times, I'll get 2 different numbers or 3 different numbers, right? I don't have to do that. All I have to do is ask Excel, how many fifth graders? So let's take a look at this. Let's run over and get an, let me put it up top here. Let me just insert a row up here. So we want to know how many students in grade, and let me wrap this. Wrap text. Bingo. How many students in grade? I'm going to put a 5 here just to remind myself I want to know how many fifth graders. So the answer to that question is going to be in the named range student grades. So here's my little formula. Equals count, right? Counting if. Now what I'm going to tell it is count how many times this criteria is correct. Or count the number if it meets a certain criteria. So there's my count if. And like any formula, now I'm going to do a parenthesis. And the nice thing about Excel is it tells me what I need to do next. There are so many formulas, and quite honestly, I've done this such a long time. I just know what they're called. But if it's new to you, you might not remember. Wait, what am I supposed to put there? but Excel will tell you. So if you look right there under the cell, it says count if parenthesis, and now it tells me I need to enter the range. Where am I doing my counting? Where am I going to look for the information? Well, I could say look in B3 through B101, and it will do it. But I named that range already. So instead of putting in the actual cell, column, and row and all that kind of stuff, I've got a range called student grades. Look in the student grades. Now, two things just happened. One is you will see that it automatically highlighted all those student grades because it's looking there. The other thing you'll notice is that the name that I gave it, student grades, is not black. In this case, it's blue. It changed the color, and that's an indicator to me that Excel recognizes that as a named range, that is a valid name for a range of cells. Now, you'll notice that if I take off that, it's in black, right? It doesn't change it. But as soon as I give it a name it recognizes, it changes color. Aha, it says, I know what this is. Okay. So now, looking at my little hints over there, it says count if, and it still says range, but the next thing I need to put in, according to that little tip, is a comma. Okay. So now it tells me find the criteria. So what am I looking for? In this case, I'm looking for 5th grade students. So just find a 5. So count if, look in the range student grades, tell me how many times that 5 comes up. And then I close it. 13. There are 13 5th graders. So count if looks like this. So we've got our range, and then we've got a comma, and then we have criterion, which is what am I looking for in that range. Now just don't forget the little comma there. So what this has told me is if I'm looking for 5th graders, there are 13 of them in this data set. So it just went through 100 lines of data instantly, or too quick to see, and gave me the information I'm looking for. So what if I wanted 6th grade students? Well, there's some things that I can do here to make this even easier. I could just modify that formula, count if, look in the range student grades, and look for a 6. There's 9 of those. And I can do how many 3rd graders, like that. Oh, there's 23 3rd graders. Okay. So it just lickety-split tells me the exact information I want. If I want to know how many students in that grade, there's my answer. But we can even make this a little more efficient. So right now in this formula, I have told it to look for, in this particular case, a 3. That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a 3. But instead of putting the actual number in there, I can put another cell in there. So right here in this cell, which I'm going to highlight with a light yellow, if I can find a nice light yellow, that's what I'm trying to find. So in this case, 5th grade students, right? So in my formula, instead of just putting in the number that I want, I could say, what am I looking for? Well, go look in that other cell, and that's what I'm looking for. So instead of putting a 3 right there, I'm going to take it out. I'm going to simply click on this other cell, which is C1. So it's going to say, look in the range for C1, look in the range student grades, find something that matches C1, and enter. and it's the same number. There's my 13. Now, why is this useful? If I want to change, in this case, the grade I'm looking for, I don't have to go back and rewrite the formula, because this formula is referring back to C1, which is the grade I'm looking for. So I can just change this number, 4. There's 9 fourth graders. I can change it to a 3. There's 23. Change it to a 2. There's 21. Change it to a 1. There's 5, right? Change it to, I don't know, what's my top number here? 7? There's 11 seventh graders. So because my formula I didn't write in what I'm looking for, I instead put in a reference for a cell. Well, when I change the other cell, it's going to look for something new. And that, very simply, is the hack for using COUNTIF. Let's say, for example, I want to know, let's get rid of all this. I want to know how many students in the second test had a scale score greater than 500. So I'm looking for scale scores greater than 500, okay? I can use the same one, equals COUNTIF, and I named the range scale 2, and I'm looking for, I want 500 and above, or I want anything bigger than 500. How do I put that in here? Well, I could say anything greater than 500, and it's not going to work. Excel is telling me there's a problem with your formula. So I need to do something a little bit different. If I'm putting something in there with a greater than, a less than, an equal sign, anything like that, I need to tell Excel, I'm not writing a new formula here. I'm trying to give you the criteria, right? And the way we do that is pretty simple. We put in quotation marks around the criteria. Or if I was looking for words and those words had spaces in them, then I would need quotation marks, because I'm not just saying look for 500. I'm saying two different things here. Greater than and 500. So to let Excel know that that's all one criteria together, I put quotation marks around it. Let's see what it gives me now. We had 38 students with scale scores greater than 500. And that makes it pretty simple. So that's COUNTIF. Just give me a number. One criteria, in this case, scale scores greater than 500. But the neat thing is we can have it look for more than one criteria at the same time. So let's say, let me just delete these. Shift cells left. So that's COUNTIF. So now what we're going to do is we are going to look at COUNTIFs. So COUNTIF, one thing, COUNTIFs, more than one thing. So for COUNTIFs, oops, come on, fingers. My fingers are too thick. So with COUNTIFs, it's going to look very similar. Equals COUNTIFs, and then my opening parenthesis. And it's going to start the same way. We're going to have a range, and we're going to have a criteria. That's a C. But then we can put another range, and we can put, there's my comma, and we can put another criteria. And I think, I don't remember the exact number, but I think you can do up to 9 ranges and criteria with Excel. And then I close it with this. So what this is going to do is going to say, look in the first range for this criteria, and look in the second range for this additional criteria. And every time both of those criteria are met, it's going to be one more. And it's going to count up anything in both of those ranges that meet both of those criteria. So let's try it. So let's say I want to know, I want to know students of a particular grade, and I also want to know scale score greater than 500. So it's going to be how many fifth graders, in this example I'm going to do, and of those fifth graders, how many had a scale score greater than 500? Simple. Equals count ifs with the S, and there's my parenthesis. Now it tells me, what is my criteria range number 1? Well, the first range is going to be my named range, student grades. And I'm going to look for fifth grade students. And when I put in my comment, it says, all right, now enter criteria range number 2, scale 2. Scale scores second test, and what's my criteria? Now I'm going to do above 500, so I need to use those parentheses again. So parenthesis greater than, not 5,900, 500, and I'm going to close it. Now when I hit enter, it's going to look and say, okay, looking across these data, how many students are in fifth grade and also have a scale score above 500? 7 fifth graders had scale scores above 500. And if you remember, equals count if student grades 5. So there were 13 fifth grade students. Of those 13, 7 had a scale score above 500. So we just looked through 100 lines of data, and however many columns that is across, 20, 19 columns across. And in just seconds that it took to write the formula, I now have a fairly complex piece of information. Fifth grade students, scale scores above 500. So that's count ifs. And like I said, I think you can do up to 9 criteria. But if you have to apply 9 criteria, then there's a pretty good chance that you haven't set up your data very well. But it's possible, I suppose. So that is hack number 2. Count if and count ifs. However, there's another kind of counting that can do one of 2 things. It can do a simple count just like we saw there, how many in this range, how many in this range, and how many in that range, give me a number. But what if you want to add up all of those numbers, all those values? Then we have to turn to something a little more sophisticated. Once you figure out the concept behind it, super easy, but it gives us a much deeper look at the data, and it's something called sum product. So let me turn back over here to my PowerPoint so I can draw on it, and it's going to be called sum product. Now, there's 2 words. If this is brand new to you, let me take a moment and explain it. If you've used this before and you already know what it is, then go get a cup of coffee. Okay, so this word right here, sum, that means add up, right? What is the sum of 3 and 4? 7. Okay, that's sum. So we're going to add up. Now, what are we going to add up? We're going to add up products. And products are the result of multiply. Multiply. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to do some multiplication, and it'll give us an answer, and then we're going to do some more multiplication for an answer, and then we're going to add those products, those results together. May sound a little tricky. I'm going to explain. It's not as tricky as it sounds, but that's basically what's going to happen here. We're going to look at a line of data. We're going to do some multiplication. Then we're going to do another line of data, do some multiplication, and we're going to add them together. We're going to sum the products of that multiplication. Okay, here's how it works. and this is, and trust me, and this is one of those cases where you really want to use named ranges. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, here are some things that I want to find out, some information. I want to know if certain cells meet the criteria that I establish it. And Excel's going to look across an entire range like this. It's going to find out if all the criteria are met. And if they are, then it's going to give it a value of 1. If they're not, it's going to give it a value of 0. And then we take that 1 or that 0, whatever it is, and we can add the final number to it. Let me explain. So let's say our question is 5th grade students. Let's see, how much time total did 5th grade students take on the second test? So not just an individual student, like how much time did this kid took 25 minutes, but total, how much total time did all of the 5th graders take on the test? So we're going to use sum product to answer that. And we're going to set it up like this. So here's the way sum product works. And then we'll do an example or 2 or 3. Let me grab my drawing pad again. So we're going to say, we're going to have our parentheses, right? So in our first parentheses, we're going to give it a range. We'll say, hey, look in this range. And we're going to look for a certain criteria. This range equals some value, okay? If the line of data meets that criterion, it's going to give it a 1. And then we're going to multiply, and we're going to look in another range equals some other criterion. And if it meets that criterion, it's going to give it a 1. So now we have 1 times 1. So 1 times, and let's give it some value. In this case, it's going to be the number of minutes on the test. So let's say we're looking for 5th grade, and we're looking for scale score. So there's our grade. And here we've got our scale score right here. And this is the number of minutes. That says minutes. All right. So we're going to look for 5th grade. We're going to look for greater than 500 in this case. And then whatever the number of minutes is going to be what it is. So Excel's going to look across the first line of data, and it's going to say, is the grade 5th? And if so, give it a value of 1. Then it's going to keep looking across that same line of data, and it's going to say, is the value greater than 500? Yes, give it a 1. Or no, give it a 0. And then, what's the value? Is the number of minutes. So let's say it's 20 minutes, right? The kid took 20 minutes. So yes, 5th grade, yes, greater than 500, and he took 20 minutes. So 1 times 20 is 20 minutes. That's the first line of data. Then it's going to look at the next line of data. Is the kid a 5th grade? No. Give it a 0. Is it scale score greater than 500? Sure. Okay, so give it a 1. And what was the number of minutes? So let's say it was 30. Well, 0 times 1 is 0. 0 times 30 is 0. So now the result of this line is 0. And the next one, let's say it's a 5th grade. Yes, it was greater than 500. And the kid took 15 minutes. So 1 times 1 is 1, times 15 is 15. So we have these products going across. Here's one product, the result of the multiplication. Here's the next product, and here's the next product. And now what we're going to do is we are going to sum them up. We're going to add them up. So the total time in this example is 35 minutes. So we are doing multiplication for each line. I know this sounds a little bit technical, and it's going to get simple when I show you an example, but I wanted to tell you what's actually happening. Why do we have this weird thing called sum products? So, but that's what it's doing. It's looking across a line of data. It's coming up with the value, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and then it adds up all those values. It sums them to give me a total number. So let's try it. All right, let's try an actual example here. So let's say this is our question. How much total time, or how much time total, did fifth grade students take on the second test? So I know I'm going to need student grades. Let's do one very, very simple one first. And I know I'm going to need my named range time task 2. So let's write a formula. Equals sum product. And there's our beginning parenthesis. Now, each one of those criteria that we're looking for also needs to be in its own set of parentheses. So here, for sum product, here's our first internal criteria. And I'm looking at student grades and equals 5, let's say. All right, so there's one criteria. Now, multiply that with, so there's my asterisk for multiply, with time task 2. So it's going to say fifth grade students, it's either going to be yes or no, 1 or 0, and it's going to multiply that with the number of minutes, and then it's going to add them all up. So there's my, oops, silly me. Each criteria needs to be in its own parentheses. So time task 2. So there's the next criteria. And then I close the whole thing off with an ending parenthesis. So all of the values are inside parenthesis, and each one of those individual criteria are also in its parenthesis. And you look at the formula. I didn't have to put B3 through B101 and N3 through, actually it's 102, N3 through 102. I could just put the name of the range. Student grade, 5th. How much time on task? The total amount of time for my 5th grade students is 460 minutes. Like that. Let's make it a little more complicated. So let's say I only want to look at 5th grade students with a scale score above 500 on this. Or let's say, not scales, but let's do overall gains, right? For any kid, 5th grade kid, who made greater than 20 points overall gain. So overall gain is greater than 20, made more than 20 points gain. How much time did those kids take? Times, another parenthesis, time task 2. So it's going to look across each line. If the student grade is 5th, that's a 1. If the overall gain is greater than 20, that's a 1. And then what's left? Time task. So 1 times time task. That'll be a value. It's going to go through the entire list and add them all up. The 5th grade students that had greater than 20 points gain took a total of 176 minutes. Now, let me be honest here. I'm not really sure why you would want that information, right? But if you did, that's how you would do it. But it could be many other things. It could be the number of assignments that students have submitted. It could be the number of absences for your 5th grade students, for example, right? There are many times when you want to know a total number that meets specific criteria. And sum product is going to be the way to do it. Let's make it a little easier on us, right? So let me put my 5th grade back over here. And so there's my grade. So in my formula, I just typed in 5 for 5th grade. I can do the same thing that I did with count and count if. Instead of putting in that number, I can just equals that cell. Whatever values in that cell, that's what we're going to look for. and it should give me the same answer. But now I can change it to fourth grade. I can change it to third grade. I can change it to second grade, or whatever I want to look at. So I don't have to go back and rewrite the formula. All I have to do is say, okay, we're looking in this cell, just change that one cell, and don't rewrite new formulas. Nifty, right? It's a really good way to count when you've got some criteria to meet. One nice thing is if I want to do like student grades equals C1, unlike COUNTIF, I can do things like greater than, less than or greater, equal or less than, and I don't have to use quotation marks or anything. So let's say I want kids that are second grade and more, I can just do greater than or equal to. Now I have a much bigger number, right? So I can just put exactly what I want to find, the criteria right there. Some product will use it, and it will give you your answer. So that is hack number 3. So we did counting, just how many of something. We did counting with some criteria, just for how many. We did counting to come up with a total number. That's some product. So that's hacks 1, 2, 3 and now. So let's take a look at hack number 4. So right now, I know, let me change this back to student grades equals 2. So in this case, I might think, well, la-di-da. So my second graders that made overall gains of at least 20 on their from pre to post test, they took on average, they took a total of 500 minutes. Well, whoop-de-doo. On average, how many minutes did each kid take? So if those are my criteria, second grade and at least 20 points of gain, on average, how much time did they take? Well, I could take that total right there, 501. I could do a COUNTIF to find out the number of second graders who made more than 20, and then I could just divide it, total time by the number of students. It'll give me an average, right? But Excel has a nifty little way to do this. How do you average values that meet specific criteria? Because, normally if we're going to do an average, let me get rid of all that. Normally we would just say equals average, and then we put in whatever cells we want there, right? And it'll just give me the average of all of those. So 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever it is, and it'll give me the average. But I don't want to look at every single cell. I want to look at cells that meet specific criteria. So instead of average, just average these values up, I'm going to use average if. Just like we could do count, but we can also do criteria with COUNTIFs or COUNTIF. We can do the same thing with averaging. So what it's going to do, so we have average if, and then we're going to have some criteria here. Let's see how it works. Now, if your eyes aren't rolling over at this point, well, I'm sorry, I'm doing my best. But then really, honestly, the nice thing is two nice things. One is it kind of looks like what it's supposed to be, averaging if this happens, right? If this is true. So it's a bit intuitive to know what commands to give it or what formulas and what those formulas do, averaging if these criteria are met. But the other little trick, which I think is just lovely for Excel, I'm not a fan of Microsoft products, but by golly, they got a winner with Excel. All right. The other thing is something I showed earlier, which is Excel will tell you what information it needs next. So let's start with our question. Average time. Let's do first test. Let's do second test. second test scores gains greater than 20, and I want fifth grade students. Whew, that's a lot of criteria, right? All I want to do is find the average time, but I've got the second test, that's a criteria. I want gains greater than 20, that's a third criteria, and I want to only look at the fifth grade students. What I don't want to do is have to go through manually and say, okay, there's a fifth grade student. Is his gain better? No. Okay, there's another fifth grade. His gain is more than 20. So let me write down on a notepad somewhere that he took 52 minutes, and then I will go back later with my calculator, add them all up, and average them. Okay, that's what I don't want to do because Excel will do it for me. So let me just put my 5 in there for now. So we're looking at average if, and then in parentheses, our criteria. So let's do it. So equals average if, and our first parenthesis, and it tells me, all right, Bowman, please put in the range that we're looking. And we're gonna do this 2 ways. We're gonna do average if, then average if with all those different criteria. So first, average if one criteria. So I'm gonna look in. Okay, let's just do it. Time tasks. I've already got started. Time task 2. No, we're looking for overall gain greater than 20. And I'll use this number in a moment. Okay. In the range, what's the criteria? Comma, greater than 20. There we go. Come on, fingers. All right, 44, that's too many decimals. So let's back that up a little bit. All right. So that's one criteria, average if. But I've got multiple criteria that I want to look at. So let's swap that out. Average if with the S, average ifs. Now, what's the first range? Well, I want, so when it says average range, what it's asking me is, okay, once we do all the criteria, what are the numbers that we're actually going to average up, right? We're going to look at grade level. We're going to look at gains. We're going to look at all that stuff. That's fine. We're going to look at the certain tests. That's fine. But at the end of the day, where are the numbers that we are averaging? So it says average range, the range where we're averaging. Well, the average range has a name. It is second test gains, fifth grade students. So let's say time task 2. So in this case, we put in where are we going to do our averaging first. And now we can start stringing along all of our criteria. So, comma. Now Excel tells me, all right, criteria range 1. It actually should be criterion, but I'm going to be okay with that because it works so amazingly well. So the first thing we're looking at student grades. So student grades equals, and I'm going to go ahead and just select 5 over here because we're going to end up doing it anyway. So 5. All right. Then, we're looking at student grades, criterion range 1, student grades. And what is the criterion that we're looking for? Our 5, comma. Okay, criterion range number 2. Where are we next going to look for the criterion? And we're looking for the gains over 20. So overall gain, that's the next range we're going to evaluate. And what are we looking for? We are looking for greater than 20 points gain. And I put my little quotation marks around it. All right. So, and let's close that out with my parenthesis. I tell you, those named ranges make this simple because now I know exactly what it's doing. I'm going to do some averaging of time task 2. I'm looking for student grades. I'm looking at the overall gains and the criteria form. And what does it tell me? 44 minutes. So the fifth graders with greater than gains than 20 points, greater than 20 point gain. So two criteria. The average amount of time they spent was 44 minutes. And I'm going to back it up because nobody needs that many decimals. That's just showing off. So let me go back up here. Yeah, that's going to be close enough. If you're counting minutes to the thousandths, then you need a day off. Okay, so, and because I referenced this 5 over here, I can change it to a 4. I can change it to a 3. I can change it to a 2, and so on like that. And it will automatically update the result because I didn't type in the specific value. I just said, go over there and look in C1. And whatever's over there, that's what we're looking for. Okay. I can do something very similar. Let me just move this over a little bit. And let me merge all that together, make it easier to see. So there's our grade, second grade, and let's say our minimum gain was 20 in this case. I'm going to give that a different color. Let's make it a lovely light green. Okay, so student grade criteria is whatever's in C1, and that's 2. Overall gain, this is going to fail. Greater than, instead of 20, just whatever's in that cell, it can't do it. One of the limitations of COUNTIF, COUNTIFs, of average if and average ifs is greater than, less than, referring to a specific cell. If I had put the number in there, greater than 20, it will do it. There's my answer, 50.1 minutes. But if I try to refer to a cell, I'll click on the 20 over here, it's going to fail. That is one of the snags within Excel. So how would I get around it? Well, I'm going to do sum product to come up with the total amount of time, and then I'm going to do a count if to come up with the number of applicable students in this case, and I'm going to just divide total time from sum product and number of students by count if, and it will do it just fine. But unfortunately, you cannot smush both of those together with average ifs. So it's got to be an actual number like that. And there's my average time. So a little warning on that. So those are the 4 hacks. First, when you're setting up your data, when you're setting up your spreadsheet, name your ranges, because it is too difficult to remember. Well, it's very difficult to remember what references refer to, which cells and what do we call this and what do we call that. Just name them. And then it makes it very easy to write formulas. You just put in the name. So go look here, go look there. So that's one, essential. Then to find a number of items that meet your criteria, you're going to use count if or count ifs with an S if you need more than one criteria. To come up with a total count that meets criteria, that's your sum product, and to come up with an average that meets certain criteria, average if and average ifs. But just be careful with that one. Greater than, less than, you can't refer back to another cell. You're going to have to go a little longer to join those strategies together to come up with the answer that you want. But once you've done it, you're done. So those are the four essential hacks, the 4 things that I do absolutely all the time when I'm looking at data sets. And the lovely thing is it kind of doesn't matter how many lines of data you've got. It's going to work exactly the same because it named ranges. And Excel will do all the work for you. Correct, accurately, and pretty much instantaneously. So that's it. Hope you enjoyed this. Again, my name is David Bowman, Executive Director from REC1. You are welcome to contact me by email if you have follow-up questions. So anybody who's here, you've received the email directly from us because that's how you got your Zoom link and your sample file. So you're welcome to reach out to us if you're like, okay, can you please tell me what you said about this? The other thing to know is we are going to be posting this video after a bit of cleanup to our YouTube page. So you can always find us on YouTube. We are there. I think it's under my name, actually, David Bowman, but just look for us under Four Corners Regional Education Cooperative #1, and you can watch this video again. So over the weekend, when you're thinking, man, I really want to go back over that again because I've got an hour to kill and I really want to learn this, you'll be able to find the video there. So best wishes to you all. Thank you all for being here and have a great day.